exactly. So how did you get started in your field? And I know that you're a dietitian and not one of the traditional ones I can see.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I am an integrative functional dietitian, much like you're a functional nutrition therapy practitioner. My story, like so many dietitians, so many nutrition professionals, is of a personal one. And basically, we love to treat what we experience, I think, in a lot of ways. So I grew
100%.
up, as we were just talking about before we started recording, in Queens, New York, which was a super diverse, amazing place. And in growing up there, I had a wonderful life, except for kind of one part of it, I would say, which was that I always occupied a larger body when I was younger. And going away to college, I went on a major weight loss journey in the realization that I was class clown in my high school with 5,000 students, which is like kind of the reigning achievement of my life. Like, not a big deal, right? It was a big deal for me. And I was going away to college, and I was like, it's going to be much more homogenous there. It's going to be totally different experience for people experiencing me. So I knew I had to kind of lose weight just from a societal standpoint to fit in. So I went on a really drastic weight loss journey that turned out being very physically harming to me, which I thought when you lose weight, it's always good at the time, right? I was like, all weight loss should be healthy. And then kind of me clawing my way back into good health after having panic attacks, hypothyroidism, severe reflux. Really, my way back towards health was when I found functional and naturopathic medicine and nutrition, and that's kind of the patients that and clients that I love to work with are those who are working on anxiety, gut issues, and wanting to approach weight in a really loving way as opposed to a really harsh way.
I love that. And I'm so excited we're already going to be diving into. I have so many topics that I want to cover. Literally just going on your Instagram, just like writing down, oh my gosh, I love this quote. I love this quote. So we're talking about something that is, it's kind of surprising that this is literally taboo, that we're saying that losing weight, getting healthier is is taboo nowadays, right? So where does diet culture, so let's throw the diet culture thing out there.
Sure.
So is I think that we both say that it is okay to want to lose weight, right? So where does this diet culture, body positivity world intersect with functional nutrition? I know this is like a loaded question, but
It's
like
a
let's
big,
just
beautiful,
dive into
loaded question,
it.
and I
Yeah.
love it, honestly. Yeah. So I kind of think of the nutrition world as falling into two different camps right now, it feels like. And then I think of functional nutrition as the beautiful bridge between those two camps. And the two camps I'm talking about is kind of diet culture and then what we think of as body positivity. And from years of real diet culture damage, because when I say diet culture, I mean the societal influence of intense diet creation and preaching and poaching people for it, and the kind of pressing marketing tactics and coercive manipulative tactics to get people into diets, and the damage that ensued resulted in a knee-jerk reaction, which is the body positivity movement, because people very legitimately were receiving much less care in doctors' offices, stigmatization in their lives when they were in larger bodies. It's undeniable, it's scientifically proven, it's not even a question. But kind of what's come out of that is a more, I would say, extreme version of body positivity, which is this idea that all foods fit, there's no foods that are bad for you, and ultimately the idea that weight is not only causative with health conditions, but it's actually not correlated at all with health conditions. So I challenge the science strongly on that. The question with all of this is, how do we kind of approach any eating change we want to make without making it a moral thing, right? Being like, I'm a bad person because I'm eating unhealthy. How do we make it from just a physical standpoint? Because you and I certainly believe in the science, and you witness it on CGMs every day, of how our blood sugar and the actions we take through food can influence our overall health. So kind of, I understand the morality piece of the body positivity movement, and then I also understand the need for real health changes. So what I think functional nutrition does so beautifully is it's a compassionate place to start from, where we're saying, hey, what changes can I implement in a strategic and root cause way, while still acknowledging my spiritual and emotional self, and not creating a disordered relationship with food.
Yeah, so basically, diet culture is stuff that we kind of all absorbed, like you need to do this, do that. But for me, I know you, to quote you from Instagram, you said, diets are not the enemy. Abandonment of our inner voice and autonomy are. So when I look at a diet, for example, a paleo diet or a ketogenic diet, I look at those things personally as therapeutic protocols. I mean, we're not talking about like the master cleanse, which is like, maple syrup and cayenne pepper, like something like that. We're talking about a dietary protocol. It's hard because we don't have another word. Like
I
diet is
like
what we eat.
therapeutic diet. I like that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so a therapeutic diet, when I look at that, I look at it as a temporary healing protocol or a protocol through which you are sort of customizing where, for example, would consider myself, if I had to put a label on it, I would probably say I fall mostly in the paleo camp.
Paleo or
And
something. Yeah.
yeah, and whole foods, paleo, and it really is very customized to me and it changes all the time because I'm listening to my body's needs. So at the beginning of my cycle, sometimes I'll throw in a week or two of keto. I might dial up some fasting. Then ovulation comes. Then I might add some carbs back in. Then luteal phase comes. And then I'm definitely adding carbs back in, dialing back on the fasting, and mostly focused on whole, real foods. To me, I don't think that falls under diet culture because I'm listening to my body and I'm coming at this not through a restrictive sort of mentality. So can you sort of unravel that quote that you said, like the abandonment of our inner voice, like talk about like when a diet is a diet versus when it's a therapeutic protocol?
It's such a good question. Yeah. So I think of that distinction really being between the intention. So if again, your goal is to create, opportunity for your body, create an opportunity where your body can heal, because I'm not that fun with the food as medicine because I do believe that food is a tool that we can use on our healing journeys, but it is not. Our body has to heal. It's a facilitator more than it's the actual tool. So I would say that any of these therapeutic diets may give you symptomatic relief in elimination of certain foods and things like that, but there's a lot more that has to go into it than just the food piece. So I would say that just a distinction there that I think is important. But so if someone is going into, let's say, a paleo diet and their goal is to feel better and overall just a positive experience that they want to have to help themselves facilitate healing in some ways. That's totally different than going into a paleo diet while saying you can't eat any of that or else you're going to die and you're going to feel really sick and you're going to gain weight. The way that we interact with that is what makes it a diet or not a diet. I think it's less about what actual style you're eating and what the intention is behind that. And usually I know when something's a diet for me or becomes a diet when I have a lot of fear behind it. When you have a lot of fear behind your food decisions, it's probably not the right timing, season for you to use that therapeutic piece. But the actual therapeutic diets themselves are great as long as your body is ready to interact with them in that way. So the intention behind them, the timing of them for what your body can take and what your body wants at that time is really important. What your current relationship with food is really important. And I think that what is often missed is this inner voice piece of it. So when I was even speaking before in a heightened voice, oh, you shouldn't be eating that. To me, that's a fear voice. And so what I have a lot of my clients do is identify like what kind of voice is coming out and saying that. We all have these kind of internal voices in our heads that communicate with each other. And I think getting to know them is a huge advantage for our health. My issue always with the body positivity movement has been that there's this new kind of voice that's introduced into my clients' heads. And it goes like this. You shouldn't want to lose weight. You're beautiful just the way that you are. As I said, I'm a New Yorker. Like we don't talk like that.
We don't talk like that.
We don't talk like that. Okay?
No.
We're very loving and we're very loyal and intense people, but not toxic positivity kind of voices. So there's also a point where that positivity becomes toxic positivity when it's not your authentic self. So the difference for me would be if I ate something that I know I'm not going to feel great, but I want to eat this anyway. That's how I would say it. So we have to kind of notice how we're interacting with ourselves and where these food decisions are coming from. Are they coming from someone else's voice? Are they coming from our authentic voices? So that's really what I want people to think about when they're making food choices, not only what food choices you're making, but how are they making you feel from a somatic way and what kind of thoughts are coming up around those foods and are they yours?
Yeah, that's really helpful to think about that voice that's behind it. And I think that can also branch into like the orthorexia conversation too. So this isn't something I specialize in. It's just honestly just something I've heard about. But can you talk about that orthorexia and sort of where that line is? for us?
Absolutely. Yeah, so orthorexia is a eating disorder characterized by fear of eating things that are not perceived as ultra healthy. So I think for a lot of people, what orthorexia manifests as is eating really limited amounts of certain types of food, because it's like there's these foods that are perceived as safe, essentially. And that's, to me, a big part of that is nervous system dysregulation and feeling unsafe, of course, in your environment. But what can be a little threatening for people is these elimination diets can lead to some disordered patterns in the long term. And there's a really big reason for that, which is that if people are experiencing chronic illness and they feel better, let's say on an autoimmune protocol, they are then might be afraid to reintroduce tomatoes after, right? They might say, you know what, I don't feel sick anymore. It was the tomatoes that was doing that to me. So it's not that any one diet causes an eating disorder, but they can create a potential downstream effect combined with nervous system dysregulation. So orthorexia specifically is the fear of eating foods that are not perceived as ultra healthy or safe. And I would say that this is a consideration for people if you have any sort of predisposition to those fearful thoughts around food, for sure to be really considerate to yourself when you're approaching an elimination diet or something like that too.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And back in when I kind of first started paleo, my mom had a lot of concerns about it because it was something that was really new. And, just the fear of something new and like, why are you doing all this? Like, this is basically the opposite of what I learned in the 80s and 90s, where, we stayed away from fat and we ate the food pyramid and everything, that kind of way of eating. So it was very different. But she also, she started hearing about the term orthorexia, and she's like, I feel like, are you coming to that point where you're orthorexic because, you're going to a restaurant and you're like, oh, this has a seed oil or whatever. And to me, the way I found that sort of, I didn't identify with the orthorexia stuff, but I did identify with having strong boundaries and sort of controlling what I can. So that was sort of where I ended up sort of falling in on that spectrum. And so I think that those are two really helpful points. That first off, we're not going to be able to control everything. So, you go to a house party, your family, like you bring a dish that you can eat and, oh, so-and-so, got gluten-free breadcrumbs. Okay. That's not normally what I eat, but like, I appreciate the effort. So, making those sort of being able to be flexible, but also having strong boundaries. Like, I am gluten-free. That is a boundary, right? So there's certain things that I just don't eat. And I think that, and I talked about this with Liz Wolf, talking about like boundaries. I know, I love her too. Just boundaries around food. And it's like we encourage boundaries in relationships, boundaries, are coming out of our ass, so to speak. Yet when it comes to food, how can we say like, no, all foods should fit? Like, all foods should fit? Really? Like, every food that's ever been invented, like a Twinkie, should fit? Like, that is a man-made concoction. So what do you think about all this?
Oh my gosh, it's such a fascinating conversation, because if you actually think about kind of, all right, you're a person, I also mostly eat like a paleo style diet. Like, I think a lot of health professionals end up in the same spot where you're just eating foods that look like food the most you possibly can, right? Like, let's just, that's at a baseline. Hopefully that's the goal of what we're doing. If you went to even somewhere like Europe, you might not have that consideration about gluten as much. So it's like, to be healthy in America, you almost have to look orthorexic in some ways, which is so weird to think about. And it's interesting because on my podcast, I had a couple of guests who were Ayurvedic professionals or TCM. And I said, how does this idea of intuitive eating where all foods fit into the model of Ayurveda or TCM, which have been around 5,000 to 10,000 years, depending on the practice. And intuitive eating has been around 30, 40 years, something like that. So I'm like, how does that fit in or grapple with the science that And in the short of it, they were like, it kind of doesn't, especially when it comes to the Western foods that we have. So if the narrowness of the foods you eat is so much less in America, it could be because there's so many different food commodities in America that it looks narrow compared to that. But if you went to a different country, you might look like you eat more, foods than other people. So again, when we want to know, am I getting too far down this rabbit hole? Am I feeling like I'm applying too much control and fear? You have to really ask yourself, like, again, how much fear is coming up around those things? That's when you get into a territory where you're not going to make the best decisions for yourself and where your nervous system's going to be dysregulated anyway. So your goal is to get better digestion. If your nervous system's trash, like, it's not going to get you there anyway. So it's really important that we do not fear food. And I can guarantee that while you or I might feel like crap eating some food-like commodities, that's what I would call Twinkie, like a food-like commodity, it wouldn't be enough for the amount of fear that some people experience in front of a Twinkie. Like, yes, we might have some digestive upset. Yes, we might feel brain fog the next day, but short of if someone actually has celiac disease or something, of course, like they're going to experience, huge symptoms. But the fear, we also want to be proportionate with the risk analysis. And I think that's also what's really important. And we can make choices for ourselves based out of love instead of fear. And that's how we stay away from that disordered eating portion and more into those just decisions that make us feel good category.
Yeah, absolutely. So where would you say that someone should start, or you might suggest starting with looking at putting healthy boundaries around food?
Yeah, I think that you named it before, which is the first thing I would do is find out what your non-negotiables are. So for myself, like you, I don't eat gluten. And the way that I say that is I don't eat gluten. So I don't say it like, I try not to eat gluten. I don't do it. So it's just not a part of my life. So for me, that's a non-negotiable. There's no situation where I'm going to eat gluten. Fine. That's data. I don't feel good. It's easy for me, right? Then I think about, okay, if I'm traveling or something like that, I need to have beef jerky or some protein with me at some point in case I don't know. I eat every 4 to 5 hours. Like sometimes if I'm at a museum in a different country, I might be walking around for hours. I might not, I might totally forget to eat. I might want a little protein or bring an apple with me. So for me, my non-negotiables are I need to have protein, maybe a little bit of carb or a little bit of fat every 4 to 5 hours. So I know that about myself. I have, my staff dietitian. She travels. She drinks coffee. She can't drink like moldy coffee in hotels. She's got to bring coffee with her. First of all, know what your things are. Like know who you are and what your body needs. That's the hard part. And then you can build your boundaries around that for sure. And again, it's a risk analysis because Danielle, one of the hardest things in life is experiencing social rejection or feeling weird, and it's just so hard for people to be in these situations and say, hey, I don't eat gluten, and often we're met with, well, do you have celiac disease? And I'm like, do you want to go to the bathroom with my clients after they eat it? Like, what do you need a receipt? Like, what you need a blood lab test with them? And now I hear my accent, by the way, as I said that. Now you're bringing it out of me. But I'm like, what do you need from my clients to know that they're feeling that way? So what I also say around boundaries is sometimes you don't have to set really hard boundaries around food in a social setting because it can feel awkward and uncomfortable and scary for people, especially if they feel a little more introverted and non-confrontational. You or I might feel really bold in those situations. So what I would just say to someone is do whatever you want to do. And if someone asks you, you say, just because I don't eat gluten, because, or you can, what I give people to do, which is a sneaky gaslighty trick that is not real or psychologically proven, but just something I've told my clients they can use is just mirror someone with the question right back. So if someone asks like, why aren't you eating gluten? Do you even have celiac? Then I would say, why are you eating gluten? I would just you can be playful with it. It doesn't always have to be this like, well, if you look at my gliadin reactions, like it doesn't have to be like, look at my IgA. Like you don't have to do that. It can just be playful too and sassy, and you can set boundaries however you want to. They don't have to be this like really harsh boundary either.
Yeah. So with the whole conversation about what to say when someone asks you about, your food preferences or your boundaries around food, especially with the gluten thing, I've found that a really good way to just put it off is like, oh, it really messes up my stomach. No one's going to be like, really? In what way? Like they're not going to go into detail. And if that's just sort of something like, oh, okay, like, we understand a lot of people are like, oh, I can't ask for the cheese because I'm going to run to the bathroom. People are understanding of that. So it's just, I feel the simplest, shortest way to not give a ton of details, but to also be like, oh my gosh, I just feel horrible when I eat it, get a migraine, and then change the subject. The other thing, like when I first started eating this way, I was that, classic over-explainer and also wanted to help people and tell them like, oh my goodness, do you know what's in the pizza that you're eating and all that, fun stuff that we all kind of go through at the beginning. Or maybe it was just me. Now I have a podcast to channel all that into, Yeah. So that was something that I also had to learn, like, if people are asking questions, then that's a good place to kind of go into it. But sometimes we get so excited about all these things that we're doing that we sort of offer up this information, and what we're doing is really holding up a mirror to someone else. When we cut out sugar, it's making someone else almost like, because of what we're doing, go into this shame cycle. Like, I know I should be cutting out sugar. I don't do it enough. And they're beating up on themselves. And so they might take it out on you, or like not want to hear what you're doing. So it is a really touchy subject to also just even have these conversations. And, you know, directing people, be like, oh, you know, I follow Michelle. She really explained this really well. I don't really know how to explain it, but I just feel better without it. I just don't feel well when I eat it. These really vague sayings, but it's standing up for yourself. It is important. And, you know, I will say that when I am the person out at dinner asking the server, like, excuse me, what oils do you cook in? You know, I don't feel glowing with confidence as I do, you know, if I'm on stage or talking on this podcast. I do feel sometimes this is something I have to work through, like almost like it's this burden and I'm asking too many questions. And, you know, I don't want to feel like that, but I also want to advocate for myself. So just as you said, like calling out that this isn't easy, like eating healthy, what we would put, let's just for sake of ease, trying to eat in a healthy way and eat health promoting foods on a regular basis in the United States of America in 2023 is challenging. And we have to put ourselves out there and look weird and do these extra things. Like I carry salt in my bag. And like I was just thinking when you were saying those non-negotiables, I'm like, I carry salt in my bag. Sometimes if I go to a restaurant, if I go to a sushi place, I'll bring my own coconut aminos because I don't have soy sauce. Sometimes I'll bring my own wasabi and ginger because I saw the ingredients in those in Whole Foods and I was like, oh my gosh, these are terrible. So just all the thing, I bring the protein. I'll have like a Paleo Valley, you know, meat stick or some, you know, clean type of jerky. There are things that, you know, I just have food sometimes with me because those are my non-negotiables. And so we do have to do extra things. And then sometimes it's really just stepping into that identity and owning it. And now everybody knows me as that person. So we'll be at a restaurant and they're like, Danny, do you have your salt with you? I'm like, of course I do. Danny, do you have electrolytes for my water? Sure. You know, do you have the Analemowon to structure my water? Like, you know, and then they know you as this. So give yourself a chance to step into this and, you know, identify with this as this person and just keep standing up for yourself is kind of what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think what's hard for a lot of people is that they actually don't know what it feels like to even feel well. So I want to even walk it back to how do we even know what our non-negotiables are? And I think this takes a lot of just tracking. It's not about tracking your food calorie by calorie or anything like that, but just tracking how you feel when you eat certain things, tracking what happens with your digestion when you eat certain things. Exactly. You got your glucose monitor. Exactly. There's different ways we can do that to touch base with it. And when I talk about tracking, I'm talking about tracking your signs and your symptoms. Your symptoms would be things that you're experiencing, and signs are visible things like your blood sugar. You can literally see it, right? It's a data point. What I think is so disconnecting about dining out for people and just in general, what makes it so hard to set boundaries and eat around other people and why we find ourselves eating so unhealthy is because it's a very dysregulating experience to eat in front of other people. Like it's hard. Like you're socializing. If you and me, like, you know, we're like, if you're vibing, like you're on a different wavelength, like it's hard to do those things. And what I think is really important for people to do is touch base inside your body. What is my body experiencing before, during, and after those experiences? Because especially, again, if you're more introverted, it can be exhausting being in those situations. And sometimes you just want a little cushion. Like that might be a piece of cake or something. And that's completely reasonable. And I understand. Just listening to what your body's needing and to understand better, like what that dysregulation feels like, I think is so important for people too.
Yeah, I love that you talked about that, identifying and getting really, really dialed in with how foods make you feel. How does it feel when I am really tired and I push myself to stay up because I'm addicted to scrolling on the stupid internet, you know? And it's like, oh, I feel bad. Like, we have to start noticing these things, and that's why a CGM could be so helpful, because all of a sudden you have this inside look to your physiology and you're like, oh, that's why I'm craving. That's why I have this afternoon headache. That's why I feel anxious. That's why I'm shaky right now. So it gives you this look on the inside. And so some of these trackers are so helpful for just putting together the pieces of understanding how different foods and lifestyle strategies are affecting you. And so if we don't know that, if we are, like you said, disconnected, abandoning our inner voice and our autonomy, and we're outsourcing this to so and so on the internet, on Instagram, because she has a good body and I want to look like that, well, that's really, it might not be what you need, and that's why you're not getting the same results as her. So as I was trained as a nutritional therapy practitioner, and we really focus on bio-individuality, and that can be hard to do when you're not a nutritional professional. That's why I went back to school, so I knew how to heal myself. Like literally, this stuff is hard. So working with someone who can help you put these pieces together are really important too, but really listening to what happens when you eat these foods and starting with some sort of elimination diet that's not disordered to cut out foods like in that way, right?
No, I don't. I think especially if you want to just use it as data, and that's the really important word, instead of using these things as a marker of your morality, like, oh my gosh, I ate that cookie and my blood sugar went up. Instead, it's just like, okay, I ate the cookie and my blood sugar went up. Again, notice even the cadence and the way that I'm saying that. Notice how my, body changes when I say that. Listen to the voices and how we're speaking to ourselves. That's how you'll know. And this is also another like little trick people can do from a psychological standpoint is when you're hearing those voices, like I almost see a different color. Like when I know it's my real voice, I'll see the color blue. When it's a voice, it's like, Michelle, you shouldn't be eating that. I'm like, ooh, the color red. Like that doesn't feel good. That made my stomach.
Is it your mom's voice?
I don't know. My mom has a very aggressive Queen's accent. Yeah, it would be harsher than that. It would be, yeah, no.
Yeah. I'm just, and for a lot of us, if we have that like
You're
shaming
right.
parent, I'm not calling out your mom.
You can.
I may or may not
Love
be
her,
calling
but
out.
you can.
Yeah. No,
No, but
like,
you're
oh,
absolutely
Danielle,
right.
you're going to eat that? Like, are you going to eat
come
that?
from, we collect those voices from different people in our life and definitely in childhood. So you're 100%
Absolutely.
right. I love that you brought that up too. And just think about where that voice is coming from. And what I would say in response to those voices, again, like, listen, there's times in my life where I'm like, all right, we're going to go kind of low carb. Let's just rock it. Let's see what happens. And then I'll notice like disordered thoughts will start coming up where I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I ate that carb. I'm like, all right, it's not your time to go low carb right now. Let's wait. Like, let's cool this for a second. Let's wait like a month. See if because to me, that's like maybe my HPA axis is a little dysregulated. Like it's not, I'm listening to those voices and my body's responses like, oh, I went really low carb and like, I'm eating 30 grams of carbs a day and I'm up at 2 a.m. every night again. Like, okay, there's a sign that it's not the right fit for me. So I'm listening to the voices and I'm listening to the signs my body's giving me too, to let me know what's working for me and what isn't.
Right. And I love that you use that example, Michelle, because the other day I took some antibiotics and I was noticing my tongue looked white. And I was like, candida. So I'm like, I'm going to go keto because I want to. And I was noticing I had been having sugar cravings. And I was like, oh yeah, I haven't had those in a million years. So I was like, let's just go keto. The second I go keto, all those voices quieted. I stopped having cravings. I felt really full. I wasn't thinking about food. I was like, this was the move. This was the move.
So
and
powerful.
like, yeah. And so it's interesting how for me at that time, this is exactly what we're talking about. And this is where I think people need to think about getting like a nutritional toolbox where it's like, keto is one of the tools. Fasting is one of the tools. Not thinking about food at all because you need a break is another tool, right? Like, so there's all sorts of tools in our box, but we need to know how and when to use them, right? So, summer's coming and it's, strawberry season. I want to go strawberry picking and my cycle is coming. Guess what? Guess who's not going to be in ketosis right then, right? So that's listening to my body, and that doesn't have to be shameful, and knowing that our bodies are cyclical and that our bodies benefit from carbohydrates at different times of the month and around our workouts, we can add these things in with love instead of with that fear and like, oh my gosh, you're going to gain a pound because you put a carb in. Like and especially my community where, sort of more in the low carb space, I sort of come out as being like, we aren't supposed to be in ketosis forever, everybody. Like, good news. Like, ketosis is a protocol, and it's something that our bodies went into when we were starving, when there wasn't food around. And it's really beneficial. And we can tap into that innate, intelligence of the body, just like with fasting. Food is abundant, but we can get benefits from fasting, but we have to know when to dial it up and when to dial it down, or else that can become disordered in and of itself. So using these tools too long, I think, is where people will say, you have an issue with it, like, oh, you're over fasting. So then the answer is not to never, ever, ever fast again sometimes, right? So it's like, how do we find the nuance? How do we find those shades of gray? Because most of the time, most things in nutrition are not black and white. And like, I am an Enneagram 1 recovering perfectionist. Like, I like the right and the wrong. And I went into a field where there is no right and wrong. So it's a continual challenge.
It is. And I think the more you know in nutrition, like now I'm almost 9 years into being a dietitian, the more you know, the less you know. That is so
100%.
true. Like have you ever heard of like the Dunning-Kruger effect? It's like those two psychologists who made the XY axis of confidence and competence. So it's like, as people are first practitioners, they're like, we got it all. We're doing paleo. We know this whole thing. We're going to fix everyone and heal everyone up. Like, this is great. And then like paleo doesn't work for some people and you're like, huh, that's weird. And like keto doesn't work for some people sometimes. And you're like, that's weird. And you start to see, and as time goes on, I'll have times where I've like, some of my friends are the coolest, smartest dietitians, doctors, and I'll message them and I'm like, do we know what we're doing anymore at this point? Because it's so individualized. Like, I don't really mean that, but point being, we're like, it's so individualized and so case by case. It's not only the person that's bio-individual, it's the season of their life that's bio-individual. It's their spiritual status that's bio-individual. Like every single part of who we are as people. So really the kind of quest of health is just about developing an intimate and close relationship with oneself. Like that's the healthiest people in the world, I always say, are the most selfish people and the most self-aware people. Like I think those are those people. But it's really freaking hard to navigate that when you're always feeling not good. So it's really hard to, I really have to just say that because I understand all of my clients are people who are chronically ill in some form. And it's easier said than done. Like you're not just going to get a CGM and be like, everything's perfect now. My blood sugar's balanced and everything's perfect. But you take everything, and I love that you use the toolbox. Let's apply this tool now. Let's see if it works. Let's apply this tool now and see if it works. It's a big plug and play and just a huge amount of listening to our bodies. Huge amount of listening.
I couldn't agree more. It's so much of what I do with my program and with my with my clients. And honestly, I have this very detailed symptom questionnaire that I send to all my clients when we first start. And oftentimes I started to notice this trend of when someone has type 2 diabetes versus someone who's not in the diabetic range and maybe they just have some blood sugar dysregulation going on, some other things. Usually I find that the person with type 2 diabetes, they rate their symptoms much lower and so less severe than someone who is sort of has better blood sugar markers. And I was starting to think, like, why is that? And I'm starting to maybe come to a conclusion that I think it has to do with how dialed in a person is to their symptoms, and perhaps that's why it has become so progressed. It's that they maybe didn't feel it, or they weren't aware of it, or they're self-medicating. So it's like, well, they might be the person who it's like the pot of coffee a day, that's how they manage, and then the sleeping pills at night and the ibuprofen for the aches and pains, and the eating carbs every few hours to get energy. So this idea of like self-medicating their way out of it. And so I do find that people who are more tuned in, sometimes, we could even, I put myself on this, like, like over exaggerating it. We have an easier time. It's like that blessing and a curse. It's like we feel it really intense, we're so tuned into our bodies. But I think that, when we have that really hypersensitivity, we're the ones who are most attuned to what we need. And so, it could be, some people might be maybe annoyed by your symptoms, or maybe you get some pushback. It's like, oh, you always feel something every time you go out to eat, or like, I feel fine if I eat that. And I don't want people to be, celebrating their issues and so focused on that they're not focused on the goal of health and visualizing, like, what will it feel to feel healthy, because we can get so bogged down in our symptoms. but also not to feel bad that we are these delicate flowers and we are the ones that, the canaries in the coal mine feeling these things, because we're so tuned in with our body. It will help us to be more aware of what's happening so we can give our bodies more of what it needs. Does that feel like it
It
makes
so
sense?
does. And I think in the case of people who have more progressed illness, I'm sure they're also sensitized to feeling not well after a long
Yeah.
time. And I'm sure that at that point, for a lot of people, if you feel not well every day for like 10 years, your resilience stores are probably so tapped. It's so freaking hard to feel not well. It's funny, I think we often view people as chronically ill as being like weak. And in my head, I'm like, no, they withstood extreme discomfort every single day of their lives. My people in life are the people who have been through stuff. My people are the freaks. My people are the ones who are not like everyone else and don't experience things like everyone else, who feel things deeply, like you're saying. So it's no surprise, because maybe those people are also the grin and bear it people who are just like, yeah, I don't know. This is my lot in life. And if you also don't believe that it's possible to reverse diabetes, if you don't believe it's possible to heal yourself in any way, I guess people will also resolve themselves to say, what am I going to do? And that's kind of the rhetoric, it's a societal mirror, right? We know that that's kind of the rhetoric in Western medicine is like, you have to take medications for life, and there's not anything you can do through diet really to alter these things, besides like randomly doctors recommending Mediterranean diets. I don't know. That's like the one thing I hear from everyone. It's so random.
It's like so safe for them to just say
Yeah,
that word,
exactly. Like
right?
kind of
Yeah.
vegetarian or Mediterranean is like their like go-to. It's interesting. I hear that a
Yeah.
lot, which is very funny. But I think that's a piece of it too. And then again, just from a American standpoint, since a majority of us are metabolically unwell and a majority of us are chronically ill at this point, over 60% and now, I think we don't really know what it's like to feel normal or feel okay. And I also think when we're dealing with such extreme discomfort, it's awesome to tap in and to tune into what your body's telling you. But when the message is so loud, and I think of anxiety and I think of these symptoms as messengers from our body. Like even when we get a rash, your body's like, I have to tell you something. Let me show you. I have to show you some visual way or some mental way. I have to tell you something. It can feel so loud for people to tune in that I think we do everything to tune out, because it's really uncomfortable sometimes when we're so dysregulated. So I think that's another piece of this too.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So you said, I want to bring intuitive eating into this because I feel like we're talking about chronic illness, and you have a quote on your Instagram that says, intuitive eating is a luxury and a privilege for those who are not battling acute or chronic illness. And I was like, amen. Like, oh my gosh, yes, I love that. Can we talk about that?
Well, in relationship to those body signals we're talking about, how can you receive signals from your body when your body and you don't have a relationship, right? Your body, you don't know what your body's trying to tell you. So again, intuitive eating is really focused on those 10 principles of intuitive eating are distinctly focused on creating an environment where food feels really safe and where your body is telling you which foods are going to work with it at what time. You're listening to your hunger and fullness cues. Again, the premise of it is good and rock solid. But when things get really murky is when we can't interpret those signals, right? So again, for someone like you, Danielle, like we're talking about, let's say blood sugar specific. We're on the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. Of course, we're going to talk
Yeah.
about sugar, but if people are eating something that's really high in sugar for them and it's overriding their ability to understand their own cravings, you kind of like have to take intuitive eating out of the equation altogether, because they're not accessing their intuitive self. They're accessing their like reward system, dopamine part of their brain. They're not actually listening to that part of themselves. So where I feel like intuitive eating doesn't work on its own, it's a tool. And it is one of those tools in the toolbox, by the way. And it's an amazing tool. It's for people who are experiencing real chronic illness. And I'll give you this example. Like someone who has acid reflux, they can get this weird feeling of like, I call it like there's a little elf in your stomach and it's gnawing at you to get out. And that can feel like hunger when it's really a feeling of being distended and overly full. So for someone like that, they could access their hunger and fullness cues, but those hunger and fullness cues are getting completely skewed by something physical that's going on. If you have a parasite, that can cause sugar cravings. So it's hard to listen to your emotional self when your physical needs aren't being met. And I even think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you have to meet the basic needs of health, safety, shelter before you ever get to that self-actualization of having a beautiful relationship with food. Oftentimes the priority for people with chronic illness is health first, because they are very uncomfortable and their relationship with food is not first. And intuitive eating presents itself as a tool for physical and mental health. And if you're problem is your relationship with food, that can cause physical issues, by the way. Having an eating disorder can cause very physical issues in your body. But if that's not your top priority, your number one health concern, you could be missing out on the big thing that's going on with you.
Yeah, it's so important to look at these things in the right order. And I think that's so much of what we're talking about. Like, I feel like this lesson keeps showing up in this conversation that for me, I could never have intuitively eaten when I had, I don't know if that's a word, when I had blood sugar dysregulation. My intuitive self would have been go like eat everything, like try not to eat this. And I mean, it was just, I was binge eating. I was just everything I wanted, everything that I did, I would eat healthy foods. And then I would be like, well, I need to finish this off with an entire bottle of GT's kombucha with 16 grams of sugar in it and an acai bowl. Like it was always more and more and more sugar. And then once I actually did keto and fasting, and I have come out of that now, I carb cycle, all the things, I can intuitively eat because I healed my blood sugar. The blood sugar swings are not driving that. I healed my gut. My gut bugs, there's like trillions of them in there. They're not all shouting for me to go get, a chocolate bar. They might enjoy a piece of dark chocolate now and again, and that's great. Like that's fine. That feels fine. But not the whole bar. Not, and then also break into the chocolate chips type of deal, right? So it's so interesting that I feel like that never would have worked for me had I not done the healing that I did. And so for me, my relationship with food was not top priority. I had to work on the physiology first of balancing my blood sugar, healing my gut, and then for me, I was able to become a moderator. I didn't think that I was ever going to become a moderator. And some people don't, and that's okay too. Some people identify as they have to be an abstainer. They identify as, sugar or food addicts, and that's okay too, because there's some people out there saying that doesn't exist. And I think that's really just like shutting down some people's lived experience, right? Don't you think that's hardcore gaslighting when they're like, food addiction doesn't exist? It's like, you can be addicted to anything. Like there's people on TV who are addicted to eating rocks. So I think that you could be addicted to eating something that's highly addictive like sugar, right?
Yeah, I think that in the most like technical, nerdy, annoying definition of addiction, I think the components of it that would be missing in food addiction is like the withdrawal and tolerance. But there is tolerance with sugar, but the withdrawal symptoms also they would have to
withdrawal symptoms, right?
You can, but I think at the level that definition would need to, I think that's always like the debate in the world. But what is undeniable, and we absolutely, I don't think anyone can deny the science of, is that sugar has addictive properties. So can it cause an addictive or create new cravings for it? Does it have the capacity to do that, especially in the sugar in its most processed forms that we see in the United States? Yes, I think we've got the evidence on that. Food companies definitely have the evidence on that. They like love this information. Trust me, they have it and they know it. So I think that if anyone is ever, playing with words a little bit and wants to say like, oh, food addiction isn't real. First of all, if someone feels that way for themselves, let them feel it's their own experience, like you said. And on top of that, what you can say in response is also that food has addictive properties. Hyperpalatable food has addictive properties. I don't actually think that real whole foods have addictive properties. I agree with that. It's a different like button in your brain that it doesn't press that dopamine button in the same way.
Right. And I think that's important to keep in mind because some people are like, oh, I'm a sugar addict, but I can have a sweet potato, because something that's processed and made in a laboratory with the top scientists on the planet to be addictive. The fact that we can't moderate these foods, and that's another topic, like why is the sign of wellness that you can moderate something that is by nature very hard to not eat? It lights up the reward centers of your brain. It doesn't make you satiated. So it is literally designed for you to overeat, not be able to stop eating. That's that's their slogan, once you pop, you can't stop. I mean, why is that the sign that someone is healed or, has a good relationship with food?
Exactly. Yeah. There's like this idea, like if you avoid foods, you have an eating disorder. And if you don't avoid foods, you're like morally good and virtuous almost. There's like this weird thing where it's like you love yourself, you're body positive if you can eat everything on, any different type of food. And while there is a sign of good health with us being able to tolerate real foods, like, by the way, if you're really sick and your gut's really, just, I don't know, like you have a lot of dysbiosis. I don't know why my brain just did that, but the amount of foods you can tolerate can become smaller and smaller. So it can be a sign of great health if you can tolerate all real foods, but it's a sign of I don't know what if you can tolerate unhealthy foods, like you said, probably just tolerance, like your tolerance and your ability to move up. I totally agree with that, and I think it's definitely, I see a lot of, I gotta throw my own people under the bus, but I see a lot of dietitians on Instagram posting like, I'm eating Oreos. These are a childhood food. And like these, all foods can fit. And look at your face. That's so freaking funny. I hope you post that on YouTube. That's so her face.
I didn't even know that's what my face was. I had to look at it in the camera. This is always the when I was a speech therapist, that was always the feedback I got. Like, watch your face.
Watch your face. Watch your face. Exactly. So,
Yeah.
But in like these videos of them eating Oreos, and be like, there's nothing bad about Oreos, or this like nutritionism weird argument, which is like, high fructose corn syrup is not shown to cause diabetes, or seed oils are not shown to cause inflammation in randomized controlled trials. And I'm just like, come on, guys. You know this, right? Like we really know this, but this is what's been frustrating for me is it's like, it's nice for these like generally healthy people to be sitting there eating Oreos, but what they're promoting is to people who don't feel well when they eat Oreos, and it could be super challenging for their body to eat them, by saying like, you're kind of a square if you don't include these foods. You're kind of like orthorexic if you don't eat these foods. That sends a really rough message for people, and that's where people are feeling so confused. The amount of clients I've had come to me in the past year saying, Michelle, first sentence out of their mouth on a discovery call, I know I shouldn't want to lose weight, but I want to. I'm like, who told you shouldn't want to lose weight? Where did you get that from? And what I don't like about all of this, again, is like, whose voice are you using? I want to hear from my clients. Tell me, like, let's get down and into it. What do you actually want? I don't care what anyone else wants for you. I don't care what some random person on the internet wants. What do you actually want? And people are getting more and more afraid, like you said, to set those boundaries, advocate for themselves in these situations, because right now the vibe is like, you kind of have to be able to eat everything, or you're kind of like a dweeb or have an eating disorder. That's kind of like what's happening. I mean, I know this is like, I'm talking in very informal terms, but that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I feel like it's such a dangerous place to be, because everything just becomes so polarized, right? Like, you have to eat everything and love your body at every size. We want to love our body at every size. I still pick that, but
not a question.
We could also we can at the same time love our body and at the same time want it to get healthier. We can love our body and at the same time want it to change for the better. And if being at a healthy weight, a healthy BMI, or a healthy body fat percentage, a healthy, muscle, having the right, muscle tone and muscle density and all that, that's important for our health. Like we started to say you can have health at any size. And unfortunately, I don't think that the science is actually really supporting that. So there's variations. Like, I am always someone who has had extra body fat. I'm not considered overweight, but I have always held on to extra body fat. And when I was at my thinnest, I was at my unhealthiest. And so I can definitely put on some muscle. I could probably get down a little bit of body fat, but it's not that people need to be this like stick, model, whatever, to be healthy, right? So there's ranges. Like, you don't have to be this like minuscule size in order to be optimally healthy. That's also what I'm trying to say. Like, absolutely. So there's a healthy range. There's a range where your body might feel best. And for women, that might be with some extra body fat so we can menstruate, right? And so it's not that we all have to be sticks, and it's not that if we're holding on to a couple of extra pounds, we're going to be like totally unhealthy, right? So it's coming to this place where we can say, I want to lose weight, but I also want to do it in a really healthy way. And I know that to lose the weight, I need to get my health dialed in, my habits dialed in, have really healthy routines. And what that comes down to is showing yourself love, like taking care of yourself the best way you could. And that feels so foreign, but like if you had a child, what would you do? You would buy your child organic food and put your child to bed on time and give your child love and take your child outside and touch the earth and be among community. We need to do that with ourselves. That's how we show ourselves love, is taking good care of ourselves. And so if eating foods that are driving inflammation in our own bodies and not saying no when we need to be putting a boundary because everyone else can do it and because the internet told me I could, and so I should just accept where I am even though I don't feel well, it's like there's so much dissonance. And I worked with someone in my last round and she's like, I've done all this like body positivity stuff and all foods can fit, and like she's gone through all this stuff and she was so afraid to try ketosis. And I was like, that's okay. I'm like, we don't have to try
Of getting
ketosis.
like an eating disorder or something, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the messaging. Yeah.
Exactly. She's like, I feel like it's so much restriction. And she's like, I feel just called to just trying some of the things that you're talking about because I feel like it makes sense. So she starts doing some of the things that I'm asking her to do, not even in ketosis yet. And she's like, for the first time, I'm not thinking about food. Mm-hmm. For the first time, this is becoming easier. For the first time, that I don't feel restricted because I'm not in that battle. And so restriction, I feel like we throw this word restriction out. Oh, that's restrictive. What's more restrictive? You can't get up, you can't bend down and play with your grandkids.
Ooh,
like your aches and pains. Like what? Choose your restriction because you have to restrict something. You can't do everything and feel great to do everything and eat everything. It doesn't all fit. Right?
If you do
I'm
it all
just
here,
on a rant now. So.
No, but I love your rant. And if you do it all here, you will be sick. So there's just not really, we have the most food availability, except of course, excluding food deserts, of course, excluding food insecurity. A majority of Americans have a tremendous amount of food availability, and even people in food deserts have availability to basically only hyperpalatable foods and highly processed foods. That's one of the components of being in a food desert too, right? And I think the interesting thing about weight is that the diet culture era of our lives focused on weight being the most important predictor of all of your health. And then the body positivity movement was the opposite. And I was like, weight has nothing to do with your health. And it's probably somewhere in between. I mean, that's probably where we kind of landed. And in any scenario, being kind to people of all sizes, shapes, it's not even, I hate to even say this sentence, but like, yes, everyone deserves to be treated equally because we're human freaking beings. Like, of course, no one should ever, and the unfortunate reality is people are treated differently in our society when they occupy larger bodies. Like, again, I have to say that is real. So the necessity of body positivity it's there for a reason, and the moral principles behind it are great. What we're really questioning is the scientific applications. And what's the difference between loving your body from a mental standpoint versus loving your body from a physical standpoint? I give a distinction too, that there's a huge difference between coddling your body and being compassionate with your body. And coddling your body looks like nourishing yourself from a comfort perspective. And being compassionate with your body means giving your body whatever you really deserve and showing your body extreme respect, which is why I kind of fall in this term of liking body neutrality a little more than body positivity, because body neutrality means to me, you don't have to love your body every day, but you must respect your body every day. You have to respect your body. And I think that's where we have to start with is, how am I really showing legitimate love, and what does love look like for me, and respect to my body? We're New Yorkers at heart, Danielle. Like, again, like I always say, New Yorkers are the kindest people you'll ever meet. If you got like, I don't know, your leg trapped in a subway, like there would be 15 people lifting you up in 1 second. But we're not like particularly nice, right? So I care a lot more about like what's that like morality behind it. But I also want, like, let's be real for a second about how this is going to influence someone's life. Like the client you're talking about, like if she engaged on an all foods fit journey, you know really well that diabetes can rapidly, it's like a boulder down a hill. Like when your blood sugar gets dysregulated, that thing starts rolling, and it's so quick to develop into diabetes. And then you have a whole new host of issues. So for someone who could have been in that in between and went further down that direction, that's going to take years to correct. So it's like, that might not be the most nice thing to say, the most, coddling, sweet thing to say, but the most compassionate thing to say would be, let's find out how we can take you a little bit further in the most gentle way possible together without creating any disordered eating. So we have to be compassionate and we have to avoid coddling, which stinks. And I am both, I hope, a kind person and a nice person, but I hold kindness way higher than I hold niceness. Like I will always be compassionate with my clients, and I don't coddle, like I'll coddle them if they have a very hard time, but it's much more about that compassion, which is let's hold that mirror up, like you said, and show you what you actually need, as opposed to what might feel really sweet right now.
Yeah, and what I have been really excited about is that as my group program is called Blood Sugar Mastery, and as I've run this program like 14 times now, and in the last several rounds, people are coming to me and they're like, I do have a goal of weight loss. That's not my primary goal. And I love that they're saying this.
Cool.
I love that it's not a primary goal, because it's not usually enough to move the needle, enough to make changes in your health.
You can't pursue weight loss by pursuing weight loss. You have to pursue the foundations of your health, and then weight loss has to come as a result. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so I love that they're recognizing this already, and they're saying that I want to do it in this healthy way. And I know that my health comes first. We're looking at these, what we call like non-scale victories. So like, I slept through the night. I started dreaming again. I didn't have to have that second cup of coffee, like this kind of stuff. And these are huge, right? We have to keep track of those little wins, because sometimes the scale doesn't move for a while, but there's a lot of changes going on the inside. But they're also saying, like, I do want to lose weight because I do know that this weight doesn't feel good on me. And that's okay. Like, it is so okay for this. And I just really want to reiterate that, because I feel like people are just so afraid to, just like you said, that they're like, I know I shouldn't want to lose weight. And I think that it's just, we need to change the narrative, we need to go in those shades of gray. Yeah.
I think also, like, the voice of weight loss, like carrying extra weight can feel very threatening for people. It can feel like they're not inside of their own body. It can feel disillusioning. It can feel scary from a societal standpoint. So I think what's really important is when you hear that urgency, like, I need to lose weight right now. I've heard clients say this, like, I want to rip my skin off. Like, I do not want to be in this body anymore. Like, it's so urgent. What we don't want to do is meet that urgency with more urgency. All right, let's start, cutting calories right now. You want to meet urgency with compassion. So what I would do in that situation, or advise my clients to do, and what you're already doing, Danielle, of course, is saying, okay, I hear that's super important to you. I'm holding that for you. I'm not forgetting that you want to lose weight. Let's talk about the process of losing weight and what that looks like. And what it usually looks like is, you can't just tell your body, I'm going to starve you. Like, that's not the move. Like, your body's going to also catch up and be like, I'm not loving this, like, and accommodate for that. So there's other ways. You got to get your system running beautifully so that weight loss becomes a lot easier too. So when you're feeling that urgency, first of all, I'm sorry you feel that way, and I feel that with you. Just hold yourself there and say, I hear you, I acknowledge you, but don't feel the need to react. And that's the same thing with any symptom we have, right? We have a really upset stomach. It's like, oh my God, I need to cut out every single food in the entire world right now. Hold on. Okay. I ate gluten yesterday. I don't feel awesome today. I hear that. I'm taking note, and everything's data and a tool. Just use it like that data. Same thing with the CGM. Oh my God, blueberries made my blood sugar spike. I can never eat blueberries again. Hold on. Hold that urgency. Hold that space for yourself. Be compassionate. Just let things come up and just listen for what your body's telling you without being reactive, which is hard.
Yeah. I just love this conversation so much. I love everything you're saying, because I feel like it's how to just navigate so many of these voices that we're hearing. And just like you said, your fellow RDs, and I know that they're good people and that they have really good intentions.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the way that they're trained and the narrative that they get, and I just don't feel like that is the most helpful for most people, and most people with these chronic issues that we're seeing. And so I'm really thankful that you're providing this sort of voice of reason and just we're touching on these shades of gray and just being really realistic about it. So we haven't talked about anxiety at all. Do you have a few minutes to dive into some things about anxiety? Because I know so many people that, blood sugar issues drive anxiety for a lot of my people. A lot of times the blood sugar going down, that's when they start to really feel it. But can you talk to us about this topic that can feel really, really scary, the panic, the anxiety. Like, it doesn't feel good. It feels really urgent, right? So I know that it can be that much trickier.
I'd love to talk about it. I honestly love talking about panic attacks, which is, you know, most people's most horrible memories of their entire lives are when they're having panic attacks, only because I do feel like having experienced them so I was having like 5 panic attacks a day in college, and I was throwing up like every single time, like complete. And I'm a really social person, and I was like really agoraphobic. Like I couldn't leave. I was in my college. Actually, there was a point in college where I would literally make one of my friends sleep in the same bed as me like every night because I could not be like, I was so unsafe in my surroundings. And that was hugely a part of that 100-pound weight loss I talked about before, because our body is constantly like, we're cave women and cavemen, right? We'll do the paleo, evolutionary biology conversation, but our bodies are constantly perceiving threats in our environment to try to save our lives. And one of the greatest threats that we could possibly have, of course, is starvation. So when our body gets any of those kind of low blood sugar episodes, our body's going to trigger that alarm. And I view anxiety I can use kind of 2 visual analogies. One of them is if we had a house and our house was burning down. Anxiety is like the fire alarm in your house. Annoying, loud, you don't want to hear it, but we won't know the fire's happening unless the anxiety is notifying us. So what we want to do oftentimes when we have anxiety is what? Shut that thing off, or like turn it off. Give me something that will suppress this. I don't want to hear this. It's scaring me. What we need to do is listen and say, where's the fire? Tell me what's going on. So low blood sugar is one of those fires that can be happening. Another way I kind of view anxiety is like, I have this visual of this mom with her son in the playground. I call him Timmy, and Timmy wants his mom's attention. The more that she ignores him, the louder he yells, Mom, I have to tell you something. Anxiety is like that little kid that's trying to get our attention. So again, our inclination with anxiety is to try to shut it down, suppress it, stop. It's so uncomfortable. Panic attacks, you literally feel like you're dying, like it's the same experience. But what I want to tell people to do is in that same non-reactive way, listen and ride it. And what we really need to do from anxiety, especially when it comes to blood sugar, is learn from it and learn what the wisdom of this messenger has to tell us, because it is there to literally save our lives. The reason anxiety happens when you have low blood sugar from a evolutionary biology perspective, again, is because our body's trying to notify us there's a bear there, and the bear is starvation. So what actually happens in our body is that our blood sugar drops. That triggers the release of our main stress hormone that we all know about, cortisol, because cortisol has this amazing job of being able to signal the creation of glucose from non-glucose entities, this process called gluconeogenesis, which I feel like people always know about from ketosis specifically. Basically our body's going to try to flood our blood with as much sugar as possible because we're so scared that we're dying. So we end up taking sugar from our muscles, our glycogen stores in our muscles, breaking down our muscle to get that, and then creating this huge surge of sugar inside of our blood to try to save us, basically. So what the cycle does is it breaks down muscle, it creates high blood sugar, and then that high blood sugar eventually gets converted into fat. So not a favorable process also, but I don't want people to get scared by that. But it's just important to say that low blood sugar can trigger anxiety and can ultimately also trigger high blood sugar, as we know, which is really important. So I noticed one of the first things I'll see in my clients is if their blood sugar is very unregulated, they can have experiences of anxiety at the low or the high. That can happen. You can get the fogginess, and that fogginess at the high can be really scary for people, and that can trigger an anxiety reaction. So I think I talk about anxiety in a lot of contexts of what those fires are, but because, of course, we're on your podcast, I think talking about it from the context of blood sugar is super important.
Yeah, that's very well said. And I also see that with my own clients, that symptoms of highs and lows can actually be very similar. So I had some companies sent me I talk about this a lot, some like paleo cereal. It was glyphosate free and GMO free. It was all the thing. It was everything free, gluten free. And I had steak and green beans, and it was just air. I had steak and green beans, and then I had my proteins, my fat, my fiber first, and then I had one serving of the cereal, and my blood sugar spiked to 168, which was the highest I've ever seen it. And at the peak of that spike, I was laying down in my bed. I was exhausted. And at the peak of the spike, I was just like, let me go get another bowl of the cereal. And then I was like, do we have ice cream in the house? Maybe I should go buy chocolate. I was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Like, my brain was taken over by the cravings. I would have thought that the cravings would happen when my blood sugar got low, but it really happened at the peak of that. So what I did was I went out and I walked and I utilized that glucose so it came down so my muscles could utilize it. It wasn't a punishment. It was just to level out my physiology because I was feeling like garbage, and then I felt great afterwards. So, and I didn't give in to that false,
The sugar voice,
craving.
we'll call it.
Yeah, that sugar voice.
Yeah, I
So,
talk
yeah.
on a lot of these podcasts about the different voices, but I feel like for your podcast, we're gonna name a new voice, which is the sugar voice, and it's like the sugar. It's a sugar gremlin.
I call him the sugar dragon. Yeah.
The sugar dragon. Yours is a dragon. Mine would be
Mine's
like
a dragon.
a little anxious, fluffy orb, and it would be like, Michelle, maybe we should just have a little bit more, and that would be mine. Yours is like,
Mine
more,
wakes
Danielle.
up. Yeah, mine is like it's like, did you just have stevia? Maybe we should get some real sugar. As soon as I have an element packet of and it has stevia, it's like, maybe you should get another one of those, maybe another one, and then go buy some ice cream. I'm like, come on. So it's like this evil dragon that like wakes up my sugar dragon.
I love
telling
that
me
you
what
have
to
the
do.
come on response, because that's your real voice. And I think a lot of this, if I think of like what would unlock the sugar shackles, it would be like listening to getting that real voice of yours. And when it's like, dude, come on, like chill out. Like we just had some salt. Like please calm down. Like, okay. That's is your real voice again. And sometimes what can happen in all of these situations, especially around carbs, is we have so many different voices that are interacting, and that's when we get into that like what I call like the screw it voice comes up. So it'll be something like maybe like in the let's go through your cereal example. It's like, hey Danielle, what if I have an idea. What if we had another cup of cereal because you deserve it and you don't feel good and it's going to make you feel better? And then another voice comes up and is like, hey, you're a functional nutrition therapy practitioner who does blood sugar stuff. You really shouldn't have that. And then the other voice comes up and goes, but you'll feel better. Eventually, what happens for a lot of people is that last voice comes in and goes, screw it. I don't want to hear these guys anymore. Let's shut this thing down. A lot of people think that screw it voice comes first, but it's often the last voice in the conversation. So what I want people, if they find themselves saying screw it around food, try to listen to that conversation before. You're very tuned into your body, of course. So you hear all the voices and you're like, oh, hello, sugar dragon. But a lot of people don't feel that connection with their mind and body. So they're not going to hear that. So just try as hard as you can to just listen to who comes up.
That is such a helpful tip. And I will say, I don't think I'm as tuned in as maybe some of my stories make me feel. But so I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that tip, but I can almost hear it like after the fact. So if that's when you hear it, it's like, why was I just, sniffing around the cabinets? Like, as soon as you catch yourself, because these things are so habitual. So it's like, why am I in here? It's like, stop, think, listen. What's happening in my head? Like, what am I feeling? Start tuning into your body. Like, I go to a somatic therapist. I have an appointment right after this because I am very not in tuned with what's happening in my body from an emotional level. I bring everything up to my head. So I might be very in tune physically, but emotionally, I'm really good. I don't mean to brag, but I'm really good at pushing down my emotions. Not something to brag about. So, this can also be happening too, that we're so cut off from what is there an emotion happening. For me, I don't notice the emotion, but I might be standing in front of my pantry and then I'm like, am I having an emotion? So like sometimes we have to backtrack. Like we're not all just going to know what things feel like. So if you're listening to Michelle and being like, I don't hear these voices, if you stop, you might look back on something that happened and be like, was there a voice involved? Was there something happening? Were there emotions? Because I think this is so helpful with what you're saying.
I need to add on, you're saying something so important. You mentioned somatic experiencing and you brought me back to one of the biggest things I don't want to leave this podcast without saying. So I'm an extremely sensitive person. I'm like a HSP, empath, Cancer, like stacked on stacked on stacked. I'm feeling things you're feeling this whole time. Like I'm weighing it all the time, right? So my likelihood is to be extremely emotional from a cerebral standpoint. You're cerebral from a logic standpoint. I'm cerebral from an emotional standpoint. But what we're both missing is the connection to body. And you mentioned somatic experiencing. Somatic means of the body. So if it's hard for people to identify the voices that are going on in their head, you don't have to. What you can do is identify physical sensations that are happening. So if you notice that your feet are walking to the kitchen without you realizing, say, hold on, what's going on? Ooh, I do feel like a little bit edgy right now, actually. My hands are like a little tingly. My feet are like a little numb and weird. And oftentimes we use food to regulate physical sensations. And I have a friend who's a somatic nutrition therapy practitioner. She's incredible.
Amazing.
Stephanie Marifox. She's unbelievable. And she says somatic eating is the step before intuitive eating. So if you jump into intuitive eating, you're still leading from a headspace. And for people like you and I, that's why it wouldn't be so effective as the first tool for us. I believe we use it in different ways in the 10 principles. But what's more important is to tap into your body when you're experiencing those things.
So much. And this leads me to another question that I want to circle back to the anxiety is that
Yeah. Well,
I
sorry, I took
think
us way.
for no, we don't have to change anything. It's great. I think one of the things that I sort of struggle with, I sort of label myself as someone who tends to run anxious, but I don't often feel anxiety. I feel like it's, if you look on like a meme or something, it might be like, here are symptoms of high functioning anxiety. I'm like sitting here, like going like this with my, hair tie. Like, are there other symptoms of anxiety that don't present as like, I feel panicky, like I'm so worried? So can we talk about those? Because I think this is really tied into that
Yeah, I
conversation that
mean,
we're having with knowing our emotions and things.
it's also like how sensitized are we to those voices being so loud all the time, right? By the time you're hearing those voices, you're probably also having physical reactions. So the physical reactions that we experience with anxiety are our heart pounding. We can notice some numbness or tingling. We can experience nausea. We can experience lack of appetite. We can experience more appetite. We can basically, the reason that you're feeling like numbness is because your body is diverting your blood flow to your heart and to your like legs to get your heart pumping and to get your legs running from the freaking bear that it thinks it is because you forgot to eat breakfast or something. That's what's really happening. So we can notice an edginess that's happening in our physical self, maybe some tension in our solar plexus. By the way, I have to say this. You have to look up in Ayurveda what like the Vata dosha. You're very much like me where you have the Vataness. You have to look
Okay.
at Vata.
I've heard of
couldn't
it.
forget
Yeah.
to say it. Yes. You have the
Okay.
so much Vata energy in a positive way. And for both of us,
Okay.
like what can be a hard way too. But we could have flighty blood sugar because of that. Sorry, I had to say that. But
It's okay.
what
I love
the
it.
reason I'm bringing and even thinking of the Vata piece is because when I think of people who are Vata, which is the element of air in Ayurveda, it's people who are very like top heavy and like you feel things here, but that can also be associated with stomach upset, feelings of tension in your stomach, again, numbness, tingling. Those are, associations and feelings of anxiety. When people are thinking, oh, I have a gut condition, that could just be from nervous system dysregulation. So anything that feels like that sympathetic fight or flight kind of sensation, that can be what anxiety is. And most people are living with these voices so rapidly. You're right. They don't even realize that it's, I don't know if I want to use the word abnormal, but that it's not optimal to be living like that.
Yeah. Would you say that being like restless and
Oh,
not being able to
absolutely.
sit still would
Oh, and of
fall
course,
in that category?
insomnia and feeling, yeah. The best word I can use for like anxiety would be wired and tired. That would be like that phrase for when we think of HPA axis dysregulation, but feeling like you want to constantly sleep, but at the same time, your eyes are like bugging out, you're wide open, basically. Like that's that feeling of really prolonged anxiety for people. And then panic attacks, I don't have to explain because if you've had a panic attack, you know what a panic attack is. It is so distinct. It just feels like death. I guess that's the main. If you feel like you have died or are going to die, that's what panic attacks feel like, literally.
That's terrible. I don't think I've ever had a panic attack.
I'm
And
telling you, you would know. Like it's really
yeah.
distinct. Yeah. And horrible,
Wow.
honestly. But I do feel like if I was able to have like 5 panic attacks a day and I use nutritional strategies and mindset strategies and really just what I call like, unfortunately, riding the wave of it, I have so much hope and for so many people who are experiencing anxiety in its, toughest forms. And I obviously work with clients on anxiety and panic disorder all the time. And it's a really, it's one of the most rewarding experiences because people again are like learning about their real identity. I always think of anxiety not as its own sensation but as the absence of an emotion. So oftentimes when people are really sad, they're not anxious at the same time. They're just sad, right? Like anxiety is when your body has an unmet need and your body's trying to communicate something with you. So from a very emotional standpoint, I view anxiety as the absence of an emotion and the reaction to that, which makes people feel really uncomfortable. And it's almost easier to feel anxious than it is to feel, even though it sucks more in a lot of ways, but than it is to feel the thing that we actually want to be feeling or to deal with the actual thing that's underneath.
So deep. That's so good. So Michelle, how do you work with people? Where can they go to find you?
Yeah, so I have a podcast too, Quiet the Diet, the podcast. It's a functional nutrition podcast. The vibe is similar to this. I just want to help people to find their authentic voice. And I would say, again, if you're the best way to unlock the sugar shackles for me would be find your authentic voice. I think that would be really important. So Quiet the Diet podcast. I'm always the same on like Instagram, email, websites, Michelle Shapiro RD. I'll pop you links. And as Danielle knows, I write very long captions on Instagram. It's not like a fun place to pop by. It's like a thinking, weird, nuanced, annoying place. But I would love to see you there anyway. And I do have my own nutrition practice where I see clients one-on-one. And I have an amazing staff dietitian, Nikki, who also sees clients. And she's has more ability to take on clients now where I have a bit of a wait list. But I'm so excited for that.
Yes, that's great. Thank you so much. Thanks for staying extra. And this was so much fun. Everyone check out Michelle, and we'll have to have you on again.
Thank you so much.